Let's run the show.
Biggest setup of all time.
Yeah,
Thank you, Matt.
pleasure.
We're rolling finally. This is the first episode in the office.
In person.
Are you impressed?
Yeah, it is. It's the
No,
first time
that's
I'm doing a
You're,
podcast,
you're
so
no, it's a lie. We took an hour to set it up.
that's fine with me.
Nothing was working. Riverside wasn't working. We had to manually record. So let's see what we get.
I'm impressed easily, so that's the thing.
Okay, that's the thing. All right. So quick introduction before I let you introduce yourself. I'm Phil. I'm a partner at Webisoft. We build custom software. My guest today is
Mathieu Santos Buffard. So I'm a partner at Gowling. So Gowling is an international law firm. We're 700 lawyers in Canada, 700 lawyers across the world in the UK, France, Middle East, China, Singapore. And I'm based out of Montreal. I'm an M&A and tech lawyer at the firm here in Montreal.
So what does that do? What's a day like?
Yeah, it's quite impressive. It changes a lot. I do a lot of drafting, I'll be honest, and a lot of meetings. Half of my day normally is meeting with clients, negotiating deals, and the rest is drafting documents. And there's all sorts of administrative tasks that are less interesting. More content-wise, what I do is M&A half of the time, mainly in the tech industry. I do other industries as well. I do M&A and infrastructure. I do as well as manufacturing companies. And the rest of my practice is commercial technology agreements, SaaS agreements, AI projects for all kinds of industries, and a bit of regulatory for fintechs, Revenue Quebec registrations, as well as yeah, you need to talk about those regulators. They're everywhere, and it's getting more and more dense, more and more complex. So I'm dealing with a couple of those registrations here in Quebec.
Okay. Can you walk us through kind of your career so far, how you landed in that position?
So I started practicing 10 years ago. I did my bachelor's in law here in Montreal. I did exchange studies, so I worked a little in Europe. I worked in Luxembourg. And then I came back here in Montreal, started working at a different law firm than what I'm working right now. I did
That we won't name.
No, exactly. I did my master's in tax at HEC Montréal for about a year. And I started doing a lot of reorgs, a lot of M&A deals, and I transitioned from my tax practice, which was niche, to a more general, broad approach and M&A that I liked more. I wanted to be involved in deals. I wanted to be a problem solver, and tax was more answering very niche questions. So what I loved about this practice that I had in tax is just the complexity of it, which I can do issue spotting right now, but I'm more involved in M&A deals that I prefer a lot more right now, and technology, which is evolving and changing a lot.
So what specifically about taxes do you like?
The complex questions, there's a lot of aspects in tax, and tax is everywhere. Everyone
I
wants.
need to do mine like
I,
today.
I did mine last week with the help of an accountant, because it gets very complex. And every deal has a tax component to it. It's not the main driver, but it's an important driver to a lot of deals. Pre-closing reorgs, taking advantage of the programs, of the different grants that are made available by the government. And when you draft agreements, you realize that probably 20% of the clauses are tax driven. So if you do an M&A deal and you don't understand tax, often it's complicated. But I prefer being on the side of organizing the team, of driving the deal, than answering very specific questions.
Yeah, that's more exciting. How has your practice changed in the last couple of years? Like, obviously, we talked about AI before the recording started. Can you walk us through like what AI use is like at a big firm like yours?
Yeah, it changed a lot. To be honest, when I started practicing, we would do everything by paper. We would have those closing binders all in paper, and we would have those large boardrooms where everyone would come in and sign all the documents in 3 copies. It was paper intensive. It was a lot of mistakes as well happen in those circumstances, because you would need to have everyone come in, and someone would miss a signature or something. So it would cause a lot of issues. And first of all, it started with machine learning. So we had some softwares that we used to improve the workflow. We had Kira, for example, at the firm that we used for some due diligence. And
Kira?
yeah, Kira.
Okay.
And what Kira did is when we had large deals, we would get a large volume of due diligence documents. A lot of it were starting to be digital. So we would upload all the documents in Kira, and what Kira would do is spot certain important clauses. For example, if you're acquiring shares, you would want to know if there's change of control clauses. If you're acquiring assets, you would want to know if there's some assignment clauses that you could use. So you could tailor it a little, but not a lot. So it would improve our efficiency, but it would still be human controlled at a certain point. Now, what we're seeing in the past year, I would say, is those AI power softwares that we're using more and more, and for different uses. So we use RVAI at the firm for
Yeah.
the past couple of months, and we've been experiencing a lot with this software and drafting first draft of documents, making markups. Using the software to brainstorm, to have ideas on how to negotiate, how to argue against the other party. We can use RVAI to draft some memos, draft some emails, prepare some budget. So the legal space is changing a lot because of AI. It does not remove the human being from it, the lawyer, the strategic advice. The prompts need to be well drafted, but a lot of the human intensive work that used to require a lot of trainees, a lot of junior lawyers, is being replaced slowly by those tools.
So what do the juniors do now?
That's a that's a tough question. They're still busy doing um, tools that require a human. For example, when you do a deal, there's probably like 100 different documents. So AI is not like specific enough. It doesn't have the capacity to prepare and think about all the documents that needs to be prepared. We use closing folders, for example, to structure a deal. And when there's 100 documents, even if you have a good prompt, you still need to have a lawyer to structure all that and to put it in place. So we still need lawyers for that. But drafting a first draft of a document, of an agreement, RVAI does a good job, like the job of a junior lawyer. So we need to rethink how those junior lawyers get trained,
Yeah.
and how they acquire knowledge, how they become strategic more quickly. Um,
That's it. Yep.
and the nature of the legal work is changing. Like, I was talking with a partner a year ago, and he told me, I remember when internet arrived, and we used to do, for example, in a large M&A deal, 5 or 6 turns of an SPA. Now we do 20 turns because we exchange copies using internet, and it's quicker, and we can use compare tools. Now the nature of the practice is going to change again, and we need to think about what complexity AI is going to bring to a deal. Regulations are going to as well arrive in this space, and this is going to change the practice, but lawyers won't disappear, to your disappointment, maybe.
No, no, I like, big fan of lawyers when they're on my side. Um, no, it's the same with tech, really. Like, the job's not getting replaced; it's changing, right? But kind of have the same issue with junior people coming in, where, in the past they did like, kind of like the groundwork or like mundane
Yeah.
tasks, or like less impactful maybe, or obviously definitely not client facing. Now it's a little more difficult to hire somebody that's not client facing right away, because a lot of the groundwork, like the days of having a dev like really good at what he does in a basement somewhere and not interacting with anyone, are kind of over, right? Because the execution layer is mostly AI. So you need, like you said, like it's a good point. Like you need somebody that comes in and is strategic right away,
Yeah.
where they have ideas, like they're good at architecture, they can talk to clients. So that's changing, and it's definitely like there's a lot of people that are going to be kind of, in a weird spot.
Yeah.
Um,
It's going to create new jobs, and for those same jobs that are going to continue, the nature of the work is going to change. So they're going to need to be trained differently, and we're starting to think about at the firm how to have specific training given to those junior lawyers, how to ensure that they can talk to clients more quickly, more easily. Because before AI tools arrive, for example, in law firms, a junior lawyer won't talk to a client before many years of practice, just to ensure that they have the proper knowledge and the proper supervision. So the reality is all of that is going to change with AI tools, and we just need to adapt.
Yeah. What do you see coming up in the tech legal scene that you're really excited about, that you think is going to be a game changer for you specifically or for the industry?
That's a good question. What I'm hoping to see is tools to improve my practice. I've asked for tools, for example, to record my time. Um, a lot of um, a lot of tools that we use right now are very old and don't work very well to capture, because we still charge by the hour. And that whole model might not be realistically there in a couple of years, but still, right now, the main way we charge our time is by calculating the number of hours we charge in a specific file, and a lot of that is lost in emails and meetings that we don't really capture. So some tools that can, and I know there are some out there, but they're very hard to integrate the different tools we're using. So probably that will be something that will change our practice, as well as some agentic tools that we might see that will integrate workflows more easily in our practice. When we receive comments from our client during a meeting, they could, for example, already process those comments in the document to adapt an asset purchase agreement or a share purchase agreement. I think that is going to change a lot of how we practice. Otherwise, I think the fintech space as well is changing a lot. The way we receive payments from clients, the way
Any crypto payments?
yeah, well, I know some law firms are looking at those solutions.
Yeah.
But
USDC.
definitely,
QCAD now, actually. There's a CAD stablecoin that came
yeah.
out. Yeah.
Most probably a couple of law firms will look at that to see if it's an acceptable way of receiving payments. I know Stablecoin Act was passed recently in Canada, looking to integrate those solutions in the tech space. So yeah, those solutions will probably change the way we practice.
I mean, as a service provider, like from a service provider standpoint, I guess the idea is to offer as many forms of payment
Yeah.
as possible, right? Because you always, and especially law firms are quite good at that, as like making sure they stay on top of billing.
Yeah, exactly.
At
And
least
it's
what I've seen.
yeah, and it's complicated for international payments when we receive payments from international clients to ensure that those are processed. And like the way the Canadian banking system is done, it's not always easy to use novel solutions for those international players. So making a transfer wise payment is not as easy as you might think for a law firm. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
hope that at some point we'll get those solutions implemented in law firms just to make payments more easy instead of just trying to make a banking payment, which is complicated for foreign players, and probably a lot of M&A activity as well in the AI space. We're starting to see more and more of that in Canada. I've done a couple of deals recently. I've done one a month ago where a French company acquired a Quebec AI company. So those deals are very different from those from the past deals that we did in the tech space.
Hmm. So you're thinking more tracking, more real time, more of a capturing of every action. Um, so basically, and you think by doing that, like how much more optimized would your billing be? Like what is it degrees of magnitude better or
Probably a couple hours per week, that's for
yeah?
sure. It's just there's so much going on, and the more you move forward in the law firm, the more you get old in a certain way. Um, you get interrupted a lot, and you
Oh
lose
yeah, I
track.
see what you mean.
So
Yeah.
you lose track of what you do in a specific file at certain moments, and you lose track of all the added value you give to a client if you're talking with a lawyer on something else related to a file. Having those tools to improve the way we charge our time, or just to capture the value behind it, will probably help, and probably novel tool to monetize how we charge our time. Law firms and lawyers have a real difficulty in pricing and budgeting what they do. So probably tools that will improve budget and the way
Like
we
internal budget?
internal budgets and budgets for clients mainly. For example, a client asks us, well, I have an M&E deal. How much is going to cost me? And then we prepare a very detailed budget with exceptions and everything.
Yeah.
And then we need to keep track and inform the client. And I know, again, there's some tools out there to do that, but specifically for the legal world, and that integrates with our expert billing systems and everything, um, we don't quite see it a lot in law firms yet. And as well, using past knowledge on deals we've done to prepare budgets and to produce those budgets for a specific client that wants to have a budget for a deal, that will probably help a lot.
Hmm. Is it hard? It's a two-parter, I guess. My first question is it hard? You know, hard. I think I saw this morning actually Harvey changing from a proprietary AI model to a, I guess, model selector, right? Where they're kind of going the Copilot way, where they're going to have multiple models available as the back engine, and then I guess the proprietary layer is the workflow. Um, but that's an example of a company that, you know, probably well ingrained within your practice that's just kind of pivoting a little bit
Yeah.
on the core product. And AI companies move very fast, right?
Oh, they need to.
And yeah, they need to, but like how hard is it for you guys, or you know, for legal teams who sometimes like they're kind of, you know, they've been doing things a certain way a long time, and all of a sudden you got to move really fast and adapt really fast. Like, is that a hard adaptation?
It is. It's and the legal world is very conservative. I think that the law firms that will and they'll need to invest quite large amounts of money to be ready for this new era of AI. And we're seeing different strategies. Some go for the off-the-shelf type product that is offered by Harvey or Legora. Others go for a very specific internal tool. I know some law firms. Allen Overy Sherman has their own specific tool, and it has different advantages, different disadvantages. You need to have a good model in the background running to ensure that the way the solution works internally produces good results. Because there are some hallucinations. I've done a research recently,
Yeah,
and that is always freaky. Because you ask a question, for example, on the Canadian Business Corporations Act, and you say, "Well, I want to know, for example, how can I change certain decisions taken by the directors?" And then there's some references out there to articles that are completely wrong. So you always need to double check everything. When, for example, when you started by a template that the law firm had produced, you wouldn't question every clause in the template. So the way you think will change a lot. So you need to have good models in the background running, and those models need to be fine tuned and need to be tailored to your solutions. A lot of those AI tools, they look at the US market first because it's the largest market. But in Canada, we have different rules, different legal systems. So if I ask a question and you answer using US law, you're not helping me. You're causing more
yeah,
damage.
yeah.
And I had this issue last year. I remember I asked a question to ChatGPT, and they reference US law saying it's Canadian law. So there's always a risk of hallucination, and we've seen recently a large U.S. firm making some representations in courts where they would use AI tools to prepare the proceedings that were submitted, and there were some elements out there that were hallucinations, and the tribunals are being more and more uh, conscious of that problem, and are penalizing law firms and lawyers that use those tools
Yeah.
wrongly.
Is it harder to spot though? Like, I guess like as they get smarter.
When you're in the litigation type reality, there's always adverse and opposing counsel, and they'll check everything. So they'll make sure that the authorities that you're submitting to the court are
Yeah.
real case laws. So you'll get checked, and most probably there are some cases where they won't figure it out, but there are some cases where they will, and the
Yeah.
consequences
Yeah, that's
need to be important.
devastating. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that leads to the second parter of my question. Do you feel sometimes like it's AI arguing against AI? Like my AI is better than yours?
Yeah, it's a good question because we used to have arguments where lawyers would fine tune and would choose specific points to argue on. And you need to have a lawyer on the other side that really is business driven. Because one of the issues is that if they ask RVAI to do a markup of the agreement, and there's like 35 different elements, they say, oh, that's not market. and the lawyer decides to argue on those 35 elements, you're going to lose a lot of time, and there's no deal efficiency in that. And you see momentum being lost in using AI tools. Like I've seen it recently where they're arguing on everything instead of choosing battles that are very strategic, very business oriented. So that might be one of the risks we'll see in negotiations where AI tools just amplify the number of markups, the number of elements being discussed. And we need to make sure on the other side that the lawyer is business driven, because if not, it's going to drag the process of deals very longly.
Yeah, for us, like sometimes, like when ChatGPT came out, every client started using it for their briefs and their request for proposal. But the problem was like they didn't really know. They were sending us documents, but they didn't know what was in it, you know, because they didn't understand, right? Like essentially, it's just like, hey, I want this, and then they just assumed that GPT, because it was still new, right? So they just assumed it knew what it was talking about, and then they're like, why is this feature $200,000? And well, you basically asked us to recreate like an entire thing. Well, I don't really want that in my project. I don't need it. Well, it's in your RFP, right?
And that's the problem. You probably lose some time arguing and reviewing materials that are produced by AI, where you would have gained time not use those AI tools. For
Yeah,
example, if
sometimes
I had
it's
a call with a client, an hour-long call, where they would explain me what are the business terms, and I would draft my LOI, my letter of intent, without having something like produced by any AI tool, ChatGPT, and then you need to make sure that what you're drafting complies with everything
yeah,
ChatGPT draft, and then you ask the client, "Why did you mention that in the document?"
yeah.
Oh, that's just what ChatGPT told me. Like, it's not helping me at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's making it work.
It's just more work. I would have preferred a call, an hour-long call where you explain me what are the business terms, even an email with the point form with the terms you would want, instead of having a document drafted by ChatGPT 5 pages long, where I'm losing some time trying to understand
Well,
what you're trying to put forward as a
yeah,
as a
yeah, yeah.
project.
That's the danger, I guess, of like, because you kind of then you get, quote unquote lazy, I guess, and then you kind of use AI as like a quick drafting tool, and then as you gain trust in it, you sometimes like, stop proofreading or double checking. But the danger is, and we kind of touched on that earlier, is like models change,
Yeah,
right?
like
And then all of a sudden the new version of Claude or the new version of GPT won't be as good for certain things.
you're right.
And then if you don't realize that, and you're still sending the same.
Yeah.
And so for code, for instance, there was I think it was 2 weeks ago, where Claude started really hallucinating and just not doing good work. And I think the reason was they just didn't have enough compute anymore for Claude, so they had to like dumb it down, right? But then the whole team is kind of dependent on that to produce good work. And so you always have to check.
Yeah, and you always have to have a critical view of what is produced. Again, this is something I found really, really hard, because we used to have good templates and you wouldn't question certain clauses in the template just because someone would have validated those. Right now, one of the big risks is that everything being drafted, you need to counterfact it, you need to counter check it. And that way of wire your brain is different when you review a document being produced by Harvey AI. You need to question everything being produced by the tool, because it's not being validated by anyone else. It's coming from different parts of the data it's being trained on. And that's why it's important when you draft a document, when you draft a service agreement with an AI provider, that it fine-tunes the solution. For example, if you're having a service provider implementing a chatbot for you, you need to make sure when you negotiate those terms that the AI systems being provided to you are fine-tuned. Because if not, you lose accuracy. You don't have that level of confidence in the tool that it's being implemented, and there's liability risks for it.
Yeah. Where do you see this going in the next couple of years? Like, do you see your practice changing entirely, or like, how
Most
would, yeah,
Yeah, I think we'll see more AI deals, that's for sure.
AI
We'll
deals? What do
see
you mean?
like companies acquiring, because a lot of companies are have not invested as much in that space, and they'll realize that they'll need to make an acquisition.
I see.
Large established players will need to make an acquisition just to catch up on other
Yeah.
players because that'll become a competitive advantage. And like the way you structure an AI deal is very different from a tech deal. Well, not that different, but there are some elements you need to take into consideration. So
More
that is,
unknowns, I would assume. Like you're kind of buying a black box in some cases.
yeah, exactly. So you need the due diligence is a bit different. You need to understand what is the AI system, what it is doing, what data it was trained on, what's the governance model behind it, what was the governance policies that have been put in place in relation to that specific model. And one of the big questions you need to ask yourself is what key employees I need to keep on to make that tool go on and continue to work. Key employees are now very key in M&A AI deals, as well as in M&A AI deals. You need to make sure that the solution you're buying will be useful for
Yeah.
the projects that you have. Because often, for example, if it's working for the business you're acquiring, it might not work for the intent and the purposes you're
Sure.
willing to use your tool for. So
Yeah.
that old reflection needs to
And
to
also, how
occur.
does it stay relevant
Right.
in the next, 2, 3 months, even in some cases, until like there's a new GPT version out that just makes it
Correct.
obsolete, right?
And there's different ways you can ensure that. You can have, for example, a license to that product before acquiring that business just to make sure it works. There's some right now very specific earn-out clauses being drafted on the revenues generated from
Yeah.
those AI tools that go in the future, and you can make sure that you're not buying something on revenue that will dry out. So those are very strategic elements you need to think about when you're buying a business. And then there's all the different risks related to the AI systems itself. And we add some specific clauses right now in M&E deals where the reps and warranties will be different compared to a specific tech deal where you'll have reps and warranties on the AI tools, on the third-party dependency systems, and on all the data rights that you've used to train the model. And data rights are something very important right now. You need to
Yeah.
do due diligence to ensure that on which data was the model trained, what rights do you have
Where
on
did
that
it
data?
go?
Yeah, and like it could be very risky because if they don't have the proper rights on the data, there's possibility of litigation rising from
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
So data is king. Yeah.
Well, so like, and that will be my final question, I guess, today is like, how do you, from a legal perspective, do you have to accept more risk? And especially from,
You
like
do.
obviously advising tech companies, like where now it's almost a necessary evil of like, we do have like, in the past, you have a local server, everything's on
Yeah.
it, everything, and it's very easy to kind of build, the legal framework and compliance around that. Now, like if you don't use AI and you don't use the latest AI tools, you're left behind a little bit. But that also implies kind of opening up, right?
Yeah. And there's definitely more risk, and like us lawyers were involved normally when there's risk, and the biggest the risk, the hardest the questions, because you need to really think about the possibilities of this risk being materialized. And yes, definitely, because a lot of those AI tools will run on data rights that are funky, that are not very clear. The use of those AI tools will maybe be in industries that will present specific risk in health, for example,
Right.
in defense. We're seeing right now with Anthropic and the debate with the Pentagon.
Oh
So
yeah.
there's a lot of this risk that will come out, and I think companies will need to think about it on how to mitigate this risk and how to make sure that they have internal governance policies that will allow them to think about this risk more structurally and in an efficient manner.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Matsu, thank you so
Pleasure,
much
Phil.
for your time today.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, you're inaugurating
There you
the
go.
official couch area.
Right in Montreal.
Yeah, right in
Pleasure, Phil.
Montreal. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.